Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us tonight Rafael Madureira. Oh no, I did the drum roll, not the. Oh wait, it's loading. All right, we're gonna. Technical difficulties. We're gonna start over. They happen all the time. It's so obnoxious. Ladies and gentlemen, we have with us tonight Rafael Madureira. Awesome. I'm glad I pressed the right button this time. It's hard to press buttons sometimes.
That's
So,
multitasking for you.
so Rafael, tell me a little bit about yourself. What do you do besides writing? Who are you?
So I do quite a bit. It's pretty funny. Like I call myself at Elon Musk in a budget sometimes, basically. The only thing I lack is like a fortune. Um, so I've done a lot of things. I do IT work for the civilian side primarily. I actually just got back from the nation of Kosovo doing a Department of Defense project for a NATO ally, which was the Republic of Kosovo. I do Army Reserves. I'm an aviation operations specialist for the Army Reserves. So basically, I am the one who approves, sends flight plans over to base ops and approves aircraft for United States Army to take off on medical and search and rescue missions. Um, yeah,
Wow.
I do
So are you military or civilian?
both, basically. So I'm
Okay.
a reservist in the Army and then a civilian DoD contractor. Well, now
Okay,
just an
interesting.
IT contractor.
So before we get into your book then, I have to ask, do you have the inside details on aliens being in military? And are you allowed to say?
Yeah, that's higher than my security clearance right now.
Right now. Okay, well, let's keep close tabs on you for the future then.
I mean, so it's actually funny you mentioned that. So this was actually terrible because like medical pilots are great. You gotta love those guys because we had an exercise to do search and rescue at Fort Bliss, Texas, and this was at the edge of Mexico. And the first thing that we were told was avoid going to Juarez, Mexico. They're putting heads on spikes. And one of the pilots is like, I want to go. And then we see that report about that little alien that they had at Mexican,
Hmm.
Congress. And my guys are like, see, we should definitely go. And I'm like, hey, look, I'm not a fiction writer anymore. All right.
It's actually real.
Yeah, it's
So
all.
when did you start becoming interested in the topic at least?
So I've had a fascination since I was a kid. I've always had a fascination, and I always ask the question, like, okay, well, are we really alone in the universe? That seems unlikely.
Hmm.
And then I looked at things like growing up, I looked at religion even, and religion gave hints here and there when you looked at it. When you really looked at it closely, it was like, there are hints in here that no, we're not the only ones. We're not
Hmm.
alone. And I mean, I also looked at, okay, well, as I grew, into adulthood and I started looking at, okay, well, look at, you know, different authors and look at different philosophies and look at, for example, like Star Wars. And it's like, okay, well, all of those things, they appear to be magic, but in all reality, if we looked at our technology, if we hadn't discovered the light bulb and we saw someone using technology, we would swear it's magic. And that gave me a basis on that. That got me really interested in, this is an interesting concept. What if, you know, we did something? What if I wrote a story to this extent, basically?
Hmm. Yeah. And there's always the quote that's floating around, and forgive me if I get it wrong, or I don't remember who was by Arthur C. Clarke. I want to say I don't recall,
Yeah.
but it's like any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. So I like
Yes.
where your head's at. I've got ideas for similar books, but tell me. So the name of your book is called Gods Among Us: Alien Thology. Is that correct?
Yes, this is it, basically. So
Okay.
originally, I was going to write it as just Alienthology, but that didn't seem like a name that would catch. And it was like, okay, well, it's missing an element to it. So that's when I took the idea of, okay, well, what were they the first time they came around? They were gods to
Hmm.
people because they didn't know what
Yeah.
technology was.
And this is a novel, correct?
Yes, that's
Okay,
correct.
got it. So combining this whole alien technology and let's just go with Greek mythology. I'm assuming that's where you pulled the mythology from?
Norse in this case. I pulled
Norse?
from Norse
Okay.
and Greek mythology in this instance. I make mentions of Greek. I even make them visit a Greek planet, basically an Olympian planet, but it's primarily Norse in this one.
Okay, got it. When did you start taking an interest in mythology then? I know you mentioned modern religions maybe, but what exactly caught your attention? Give me some specific examples of some stories that you read that made you think this could be technology.
So, I mean, some examples of it was, for instance, the Hammer of Thor was a primary
Hmm.
one, which I thought, okay, well, the Hammer of Thor has some very unique properties. Um, so we live in a century where we have, where we're starting to come up with a technology called ID locked weapons, right? And the idea is this: your weapon does not fire unless some sort of technology basically identifies you and unlocks your weapon into firing. It's the same concept as a
Hmm.
gun safe that you have to fingerprint. It's an ID
Yeah.
locked weapon. And I thought, okay, well, the ancient concept of the hammer of Thor was that only Thor could use the hammer. Thor was
Hmm.
the only one who could uniquely harness all that power. That's an ID locked weapon. The weapon is specifically designed to only be used by a user. It's the same concept as, say, your credentials for Windows or a gun safe that's ID locked, you know?
Hmm.
So all of those things gave me essentially ideas like, okay, well, this is a very basic concept in technology. And the thing about us IT guys is we are huge nerds. Like our servers sometimes are named Acropolis and jobs that I have taken before, we name things like I name my personal computer the Tower of Power, and that's basically my central hub at home. So I thought, okay, all these mythical names all make sense. Like they all tie to a technology that works with a similar logic right there.
Awesome. So, do you have any? Well, walk me through your book, and before you do that, do you have any myths that you actually tie in and maybe retell the myth from a different perspective, or are you just telling your own story with these characters?
I tell a different perspective with some of it, yes, and I tell my own story with these characters. So the idea is this. So in ancient Norse mythology, Odin had a son that was a pure son called Balder, and he was invulnerable. Odin gave him a blessing of invulnerability. The way that I retold that story was Odin gave him an armor that was completely impenetrable. It would react to any harm. So that armor would fully deploy should he come upon a threat and protect him against all harm. But it was otherwise an armor that you simply could not really touch, basically.
Hmm.
Um, I did, also create a specific character, Killy. She's the daughter of Loki and a different entity that is mentioned in the book that basically is reviewed later on in the book. An entity that is more powerful than Loki and on par with Odin himself, basically, when it comes to powers, if not more powerful. And that
Okay.
plays a huge part of the book because it's like, hey, you can face a lot more threats. And I tied into, say, the Nephilim, which are the giants of Hebrew religion, basically.
Hmm.
I tied them into it. You know, I did place them differently. I tied lizard people to it, essentially. I made it very entertaining in that regard. Like, hey, there's a whole lot of them out there, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and they're all out there for you. You
Hmm.
know,
So it sounds to me like you have a plethora of alien races. Are they all in cahoots with each other? Are they against each other? And what are some of their goals? And why are they on Earth?
So I made social politics essentially within the universe. So ideally in the universe, the reason why humans were completely left out, the first reason was obvious. They had no technology. They didn't have the means to reach the stars. And there was no interest in them even reaching the stars. It's like, okay, you have these primitive creatures that have a limited understanding. They believe everything that has powers beyond them is a god. Okay, let's leave them out for now. 21st century humans were left out intentionally because they analyzed the social political aspects of our society and deemed that, okay, you have these semi-advanced beings that likes to point nuke at each other's, that likes to point nukes at each other every time things don't go their way. We don't want to deal with that, so let's just pretend we don't exist to them for the time being. However,
Hmm.
the reason for the first visit was because there was a threat. See, essentially, the alien races all came to a consensus that they should be a republic, that they should essentially work in cooperation for the enlightenment of the universe, right? I put in the book essentially that there is a God, and that God someday is going to turn the lights on, and he's going to make the world perfect. However, events need to happen for that. Prophecies need to happen for that, right?
Hmm.
Ragnarok, which is the Norse apocalypse, is one that needs to happen. How it needs to happen is much more complex, but the bottom line is it's written that it does. The Egyptian gods' death needs to happen. The Greek gods, basically all of those apocalypses need to happen. They're all realistic, right? But basically all the races agreed that until said prophecies come true, they must do what they can to make sure that the world is as enlightened, as free, and as good as it possibly can be. However, there's always a flip side to a coin. There is an organization that works from the shadows, and it believes that it needs to harness as much power as it possibly can for its own intents and purposes. And that intent is very mysterious. It's not specified. They've never managed to establish why is it? I call them the Maku, and it's never established why is it the Maku seek to enslave or destroy planets? Why do they take over the way that they do? All that they know is Earth is a planet of prophecy because Earth is a planet in which, basically a lot of these apocalyptic events happen. So therefore, Earth needs to be protected against the Maku specifically, because if they take over, they control the terms of how everything happens.
Hmm. So the
So
Maku, are they a particular alien race, or does this organization transcend race and it's people from these different races that come together in this organization?
it transcends races. Think of
Okay.
it like a combination between a mafia and a terrorist organization. They're very specialized, they seek mayhem, but they essentially are not a specific race.
Hmm. Gotcha. So you mentioned a god that created the universe in your universe. Would you say that these aliens they are strictly physical flesh and blood, or are some of them interdimensional beings and spiritual? Or tell me what you wrote about in that regard, if anything.
So the Maku, in their case, they are strictly flesh and blood. They are of this world and this world alone. They have a concept that there is a death. They try to avoid it. They're the classical villain in that regard. You ever notice that in most of these stories, the villain always seeks to prolong his life? The villain
Mhm.
always seeks to be in a state in which he's in control at all times, which is what the Maku do. Now, here's the advantage the Maku have to being essentially that. The ancient races have discovered how to be biologically immortal. The Maku originate from the ancient races. They originate from the original gods, basically. So they have the discovery of how to have an immortality. However, what they lack is they lack a connection to an actual god. So they are of this world and they are essentially here.
Mhm. Gotcha. In your universe, did God create all of the individual races, or are humans bioengineered by some of these other races?
In that universe, God has created all the races. So ideally in the universe, God created the sacred beasts. So these are creatures of myth and legend, the phoenix, the dragon. These are creatures that are beyond explanation or logic, right? They're encoded into the fabric of the universe. They have abilities that are just inherent of them. And then he created the first celestials, which is what all of these mythology gods called themselves, essentially. The celestials came to Earth. Man thought celestials were gods. Man began worshiping gods. Man
Mm.
has somewhat of a concept of a one god, of a monotheistic, but even their concept may be off slightly.
Okay, gotcha. So what kinds of themes do you have written throughout your book? Like what do you want to get across to your audience as a message?
What I want to get across to my audience as a message is basically that there is no one answer to all. There are certain things that are certainly wrong, no doubt about it. But just because we have an answer that fits most, it's not a one size fits all. So in my book, there is a point in which the human characters, the human main characters, explain to an alien what capitalism is. And that's a fun conversation because the alien does not understand. The alien understands that there is a currency because she uses a currency, right? The Republican credits of Asgard, in her case, is her currency. It has an exchange rate, okay, understood. It's backed by gold completely. It's backed by precious metals, right? But she tries to understand that money is this paper that has the faces of your dead leaders, and you change that paper that's a promise, and you work 40 hours of your week to somebody who has a lot of that paper to acquire that paper. When in her planet, even a peasant has a basic hut. The peasant works for his luxuries, but essentially he's in a sense cared for by his people. You know, he's
Hmm.
not left completely alone. And the idea behind that, the message behind that is exactly that, is that we we have problems with our societies in the world. We have problems in every society in our world. Every country has its issues. What that means is there is a solution that is most effective for one country, but it's not a one size fits all. And that's the thing. If we're going to prosper as, people, as beings, as living beings in general, we need to understand that. And we need to work best with the ways that help us all. Also,
Hmm.
we can't point nukes at each other whenever things don't go our way. That's also very bad.
Yeah. So it sounds like you're a proponent of a UBI, and the advanced alien races they have this. Are you kind of trying to say, hey, we should have a UBI because our society doesn't necessarily take care of our poor and distressed?
What do you mean by a UBI?
Universal basic income.
Um, in a sense, I would say I yes and no. I'd say that we need to be able to provide for people to where they have their very basic needs met. It is upon people to desire more things, essentially. It
Hmm.
is upon people to desire where they want to be in life, you know?
Yeah.
Because I mean, I've also made a prime example in this. So Harry Potter has wands, right? And that's their tool. And their tool would provide him everything. Jedi have lightsabers, and so do Sith, and that's the Star Wars universe for you, right? And that's their meats. So in this book, I made it to where there are two chips. This is something that I placed even in a detail in the cover. If you notice, on the character's wrists, there are two chips, right?
Mm.
Those two chips are made of two materials. They're made of one material that is a material of light and one of darkness. And what they do when you combine them together with a human brain behind it, or with a brain behind it, basically with cognitive thought, is they materialize things.
Mm.
Every basic person can do basic tasks with that technology, but only the more skilled and advanced can materialize weapons or materialize themselves wings and things like that. So the idea is that everyone gets the basics, but you still have to drive yourself forward in life. You
Hmm.
just have to do so without the anxiety of, oh my God, am I going to die because I don't have the base necessities provided for myself? So I wouldn't say
Yeah.
income. Income is just a lousy term for that because that denotes capitalism. I would say your
Hmm.
basic needs.
Okay, awesome. I like the stance you took on that. Does this take place in the past or in the future, or does it span a long time period? What's going on with that?
This takes place in the present, going towards the future. It explains what happened in the past. It takes place in the present. In a pre-COVID world, it touches COVID world perfectly, and then it goes into okay, what happens afterwards?
Uh-huh. Awesome. Now, I don't recall, did you want to read an excerpt from your book, or were you going to pass on that?
Um, I think I'll pass on that. I have
Okay.
like so many chapters that I could think of, and there's so many interesting things that happens to the characters because like you think like, okay, it's just gonna be aliens. Hold on, why is it that this character mutated? What happened
Hmm.
here? Wait, why does this seem like a horror scene in a
Hmm.
movie at this point?
So I guess I want to ask also, why do you write in the science fiction genre? Like, what about that genre speaks to you?
The imagination part of it. That's the thing. So I work with technology. I have seen what technology does. I have seen the difference. So if you look at, for example, some of the things that I have done things to where it's like, hey, you have NATO countries that were essentially in the Stone Age. They did not have the ability to communicate from one point of the country to another immediately. And what I did is
Hmm.
I provided, for example, their military the ability to simply remote in to their systems on another country or in another state of their country, like miles and miles away. I'm like, wow, man, this is incredible. It's because that genre is very close to reality, but just barely. And that motivates me because it's like, wow, you could create things, you could make stuff up that doesn't exist. And
Hmm.
hopefully, maybe in the future, somebody who is smart enough or dedicated enough might make that a reality.
Yeah. I was literally having a conversation with another author earlier today. He was also science fiction, and we were talking, and I said something very similar. I was like, I like writing in science fiction because the technology that we're dreaming up, someone will make it. And like the future of our society is beholden to the imagination of the authors of today and of the past. And he brought up this example of someone wrote the idea of a cell phone in a book in like 1930 or something like that. And then here we are today with a handheld device that has someone's picture on it. And, they didn't have that technology back then, but they could extrapolate and say, here's what we have today. And here's where I see it going in the future. So I do feel like we as science fiction authors do have a certain power over the future, and we should not take that lightly.
I mean, another big example of that is AI. AI has had numerous warnings now, and I've done a little bit of work on AI myself, and I will tell you that it's very interesting, it's very intricate, it's amazing that a machine can perform a human function the way it does. But I put a big warning on my book. I dedicated a whole chapter on my book for that too. And here's the funny part. The chapter I dedicated to my book in AI does not involve AI eliminating human beings by any means with war whatsoever. They have
Hmm.
had to take zero aggressive actions, and yet they still won somehow.
Hmm. Interesting. Well, I'm not going to ask you to expound upon that, so we have to read your book to find out.
I suppose, yeah.
Awesome. Well, any final comments before I let you go?
Um, if there's anybody in Albania who is might possibly have purchased a copy, hey, contact me. I will sign a copy happily. If there's anyone who finds a means to contact me or wishes to contact me, I will happily sign a copy. Um, yeah, I've handed copies to people who supported me, at times like, hey, my book just released and I haven't sold one yet. I've had people who bought it and I've signed it. I'm a very open author, basically. I'm very approachable. So
Hmm.
and keep a lookout for sequels. I do intend to write an entire series and I intend to touch every single mythology that's out there.
Awesome. Well, Everybody, keep an eye for Raphael's future books, and thank you for coming on.
Thank you.